I would like to start at the end of the speech. And the end of the speech, our goal is, as the FEC's goal is for the inhabitants of coastal areas have a sense of place, of community, and custodianship with the environment. They're not bystanders letting others control their destiny, but affirmatively and intentionally acting for conserving the coast. And that's our goal overall. And we want to get to that at the end of this talk. And the second goal is to invite tourists who share the values, who respect and support local culture, who contribute, not exploit local culture, not colonial with a sense of entitlement, but empowering the community. So that is the goal where we want to get to. And how do we get there? Well, this is my speech is about one step to engage to get here is through the surfing community, because the surfing community is a very, very strong ally for those interested in protecting the coastal communities. When I start to talk about surfing, I start with one aspect of the worldwide surf community, which is actually concrete. This is a truth, and that is that there is a common culture which embraces clean water and clean beaches, a sense of place, concerned with understanding of overcrowding and unsustainability. And as my research supports, clearly support local manufacturing, especially in the case of surfboards. So the surfing community has this built into it, and we can assume that it's actually true. That's a starting point. And so a quick little bit about myself. I grew up in Southern California, and through the 60s and 1970s and 80s, I was a part of the new version of surfing, which was called the shortboard revolution, but I was also very involved in the older generations, because the older generations like Hap Jacobs and Donald Takayama and the legends of surfing of that era were my mentors. And so I surfed in the culture, very ingrained, making surfboards the whole time, and going to law school. And in law school, I studied environmental law, and I started the Environmental Law Society and was very engaged in environmental law. And then 1990 to 94, I practiced law in Los Angeles. But at the same time, I really wanted to be a surfer. I thought surfing is so valuable to the world community that surely there's a way to make a living from surfing. And so I went into making movies and TV shows about surfing, and made the Waterman TV show and made 4 different surf movies. And then in 1998, I came to Australia to show a surf movie, and I fell in love with Australia, and I fell in love with my wife, Margie, who's here today. And together we started our surfboard business. And that was going very well from 1998. And in 2005, we began a new version of surfing, of surfboard construction, because we went to Hawaii and we saw the ancient surfboards in the museum. And we realized that there was another whole culture, a massive culture that lasted 1,000 years or more. And nobody actually ridden the surfboards that were in the museum. So I remade the surfboards, and we started a small community of Alaya riders, which is the name of the Hawaiian surfboard. And that took off around the world as a trend where people reconnected with ancient Hawaiian surfing, reconnected with their culture, and started riding these surfboards, and realized that the surfboards we made weren't the only way to surf a wave. As a matter of fact, there's lots of other ways to enjoy surfing. That thought had actually escaped our culture for a long time. We thought we were the only surfboards with fins and fiberglass, and the Beach Boys and Gidget and the Elvis Hawaii movies. Well, that was surfing. But we realized that before that, there was another giant era of surfing. And from our work with sustainable surfboards, we gained a very high profile in the surfing world. And at our house, Margie and I, we shared our house with many, many, many surfers that would come through. And as a surfboard maker, I shaped surfboards with many of these people. And we taught surfboard makers from Taiwan, Japan, Malaysia, Europe, and South Korea especially. And those top shapers in those countries made it to our house and spent lots of time with us. So our surfing family was global. And things went very well all the way until about 2012 with the global financial crisis. And we had a problem in that our surfboards are very expensive. And we had the Australian dollar went from a weak Australian dollar to a very expensive Australian dollar. So we weren't able to compete because our surfboards were so expensive on the global market because of the strong Australian dollar. And at the same time, you had the world recession, which they didn't have the money to buy more expensive surfboards. And thirdly, the price of freight went way up, along with the cost of materials went way up. So we really were hit hard by the economic times. And so I thought this is the end of surfing as we know it, because surfing revolved around the community of surfboard makers. And this community would be very shaken by this. So I met with Tim Smith and started a PhD with Tim as my advisor, and started looking into this problem of how I could possibly help the surfing world and the surfing communities deal with the great financial crisis. And lo and behold, in Australia, in 2014, there were more surfboard makers than there were before. The surfboard industry had not been crushed by globalization at all. As a matter of fact, it was thriving in this world. And it was that the identity of being a surfer in your local break meant that you really had to ride a locally made surfboard. You wanted that as a part of your identity. It's what you wore. And if go down to the beach and you have your locally made surfboard and you have a relationship with the surfboard shaper and the really tight, strong community, well, you're a part of that community and you wanted to share that with people and you wanted to show people, this is who I am, I'm a part of this community. And that actually drove the whole surfboard making industry. And remember, most industries have been affected by globalization. Golf clubs that were made in Australia no longer made in Australia. Tennis rackets, all the sporting equipment, surfboards seem to, from what I can see, is about the only industry that wasn't affected. So there's something there, and that's why I say that there is a concrete surf culture that is there that you can count on to survive, and it's all over the world, as we found out. So the next question is this culture of respecting surfboard makers, in that this culture, is it reflected in a custodianship of the environment? And the answer is yes. And in our circles in Southern California and Australia, Hawaii, parts of Europe, we look to the Hawaiians again for surfing culture. And in Hawaii, the Hawaiians were on the islands for over 1,000 years, and they never depleted their natural resources. They had such a strong custodianship over the trees, over the fish, over all the different aspects of their society, that they never destroyed the place where they lived. And evidently, when Cook went there, the estimates of how many Hawaiians was anywhere between 1 and 2 million, which is far greater than earlier estimates, because they wondered how could that many people live on those little islands in primitive times. Well, they weren't primitive, and they flourished. And of course, once the Westerners came and the government, the Hawaiian government, turned to Western ways, they very quickly depleted the trees and every other resource. And so this custodianship, is it reflected in our modern surfing culture? And it is absolutely. We have these strong groups like the World Surfrider Foundation, Surfers for Climate, Surfers Against Sewage, Save the Waves, which is an organization which sets up world surfing reserves to help protect local surfing breaks. So there is a part of this culture includes custodianship of the environment. And so that's out there to see. And so I'm going to come back to Margie and my trip here to China. And we landed in Hainan, and we had really no idea what to expect when we got there. But I thought as a gesture of goodwill, we had wood delivered to Hainan, to the surf shop, classic Malibu surf shop run by Sanwa. And I said, well, we'll put on a wood surfing day. Well, for the locals, we want to meet the locals. We have some wood here. Let's make some surfboards. And I didn't know if anybody was going to show up. And sure enough, the street was packed. And we had people coming and making surfboards with us. And I don't know if we want to put if we could put one of the slides up.
Yeah,
Without
this one.
No, if we go back to the ones that I emailed to you on WeChat. It's not in there. The ones I recently sent to you. Well, everything went so well. And so then I went to some of the local surfboard makers, and I didn't know if there'd be a local surfboard culture of making their own surfboards in China, which from our perspective, very uninformed perspective, is the land of mass production, which is actually not, because you have these little bespoke surfboard makers like myself all over the place in Hainan. So I thought, wow, this actually proves my PhD thesis that the culture of supporting local surfboard makers and small local industries is actually true. It's concrete. And as we were driving, my wife asked our good friend Sanwa, well, is there environmental activism here amongst the surfers? And he said, well, of course there is. And amongst the slides, he said they started a group called Don't Throw. And so environmental activism from not only supporting the surfboard makers, but they would go to the beach, they have massive beach cleanups, they bring in the plastic and they make little plastic tools like wax combs and things like that for surfboards. And so that proved the point that here in Hainan, very far away from Southern California, they have this exact same culture. We're protecting the beach, picking up trash, becoming active in environmental issues. And then Sanwa said that they started in Sanya, which is a town 100 kilometers away. And when they started making a surfboard factory there, the culture is that surfers started coming. It was a beautiful place. So they said, well, we want to make this place beautiful. The first thing we have to do is clean up the beach. So in Sanya, the beach was a mess because it was just an old fisherman beach, not much to it. And as they cleaned it up, the surfers came. And of course, as the surfers came, so did the rest of the tourism. And all of a sudden, the government said, okay, you guys, you can move out now because we're going to put in a 7-star resort where your surfboard factory was. And that's actually sort of the way things work in the surfing world. So after seeing that and seeing this is actually happening in China, which we did not expect, we went to the World Conference of Biosphere Reserves. And we presented 3 times on surfing culture in biosphere reserves. And we went up and asked, does people have questions? And we met amazing representatives from different cultures from around the world. One was the Maldives. The representative for the Biosphere Reserve on the Maldives said, Tom, we have a problem in the Maldives. All these foreign surfers come and surf our waves, and our children don't. We want our children to be able to surf these waves, to take part in surfing in their own home. And I said, well, imagine this. Imagine the value of those waves that those people are surfing. Those waves in a wave pool are worth $45 or $50 per wave, and they're coming every 15 to 20 seconds. That's the value that's coming in to your reef. And that, are your kids participating in that value? Are they getting that value in? It seems not. It's that surfers from far away come and they feel entitled to those waves, and the little kids aren't. Well, that's something that you can change, because you can work with the surfers. You can work with the tourism agencies and say, look, you're in charge. You're in charge of your own destiny here. Another lady from another person from the West African islands, including Cape Verde, Lanzarote, Sao Tome, Principal, several other places. They said, well, we have angry locals because the tourists come in and are competing for the waves. And we have a waste problem because at the end of every year, you have all these tourist learning surfboards, big, we call them foamies. And so the big chunks of styrofoam, well, on an island, what do you do with a huge stack of foamies that you have to throw away? And I said, well, in Canada, the same situation on Vancouver Island, where you have the low Coatzacoalcos Biosphere Reserve, they started recycling the surfboards and remaking them so that they're not going into the ground anymore, and they're recycling the wetsuits, because that is what the surfers do in conjunction with the Biosphere Reserve in protecting their coastal areas. We met with Mauritius, and we actually, one from the Caribbean, one gentleman said, I grew up surfing, and now I look at the kids and they don't surf, but there's tourists that are surfing, because he grew up riding, little wood surfboards. And he says, this has opened my eyes up because my culture has been changed. And so what I'm saying is that surfers can be custodians. They have a sense of place and they have a sense of community, which can implement the science, the governance, all the things that the FEC is working towards, and that surfers you can rely on them. They're there for you. They have the same worldview, the same identity, same cultures. Papua New Guinea. And so there wasn't somebody from Papua New Guinea there, but Papua New Guinea is probably the most advanced surf culture on Earth, in that they have a surfing association of Papua New Guinea, and any surfer that comes there with a board bag pays $15 a day to surf Papua New Guinea, and that goes to the Surfing Association of Papua New Guinea. And they also are using it for social change in a different way, for girls and male equality in the surfing. And it's called the Pink Nose Revolution, where a lot of surfboards are donated to the Papua New Guinea from Western places. A container shows up. They paint half the noses of the surfboards pink for girls. And you are not, a male is not allowed to ride a board with a pink nose. And in that way, through surfing, they are taking on social inequality between men and women. So that's my speech. So we've gone from, saying that we want to end up with the inhabitants of coastal areas having a sense of place, community, and custodianship with the environment. And through working with surfers are on that same page, and they're doing it. Thank you. That's a long speech. I thank you for that, but I'd love to unpack it and hear the comments and
Okay, thanks, Tom. That was very interesting. And I'll make a couple of comments before I open it up to discussion. I trust David Kennedy's online. Is he online? Will he be ready to speak in a few minutes? I'll introduce him. He's not. Right, in that case, I will. So there were two or three things that really stood out to me. And I think when we're approaching this from more of a purely academic perspective, and this will be something that you'll probably think about, is how do we theorize this and understand it. But there were, I think, a couple of things that really fit with some of the concerns that we have here in China, speaking from a Chinese perspective. One of the things that we've learned in our dialogues with the local Shanghai Environmental Protection Bureau is the need for us to work to cultivate ecological culture. So one of the things that we've seen in recent years is the government doing a very good job of organizing environmental protection and ecological change. And we've seen people following a lot of those directives, but we have not seen a sufficient level of local engagement and ownership in ecology. It's been more of a passive response. So how do we cultivate that ecological culture, so for example, among farmers or people working on Chongming Island, which is one of the key areas for us, so that we have the potential to actualize what the Chinese government calls an ecological civilization. So hearing about how this culture is cultivated and grown in the surfing community I think gives us some opportunity to reflect, and certainly given the experiences you had in Hainan, it's something that's already happening in China, and so we can think more about that. It was also interesting that you touched on the question of this of discovering the older forms of technology or techniques that predated sort of Western surf culture, the boards that you discovered, and then you started trying, and that there were different ways to surf. And I think this is another thing that we're very interested in here in China, is what we call intangible cultural heritage, and how do we recover some of this old wisdom or old practices. And then again, you touched on this in another way when you were talking about the fact that the Hawaiian Islands likely supported 1 to 2 million people before the Westerners came there. And you said that there was probably something within Hawaiian culture that was more ecologically responsible. And I think we could say something similar about Chinese civilization, which has persisted for 5,000 years. And one of the things that we've seen with the current leadership is a return to the Taoist, the first principle of Taoism, which is harmony between people and nature, and this needing to be a guidepost for us as we try to cultivate ecological culture in China. So there is, I don't want to hit on sort of a negativity or the negative aspect of 5 centuries of Western domination spoiling the earth and bringing us global warming, although guilty. Nevertheless, I think that there is this movement that's taking place in China to try to recover some of that ancient wisdom of how people managed to live within ecological means for thousands of years. And interestingly, not just surf culture, one of the places where we're really focused on this is looking at how the terraces in Yunnan and Hunan have survived for 3,000 or 4,000 years, despite climate change that has impacted China at several points in its history, and how these places have managed to continue. So these are just some of the key. Oh, there was one more question that you were talking about after the global financial crisis, and that it hurt your business, but I didn't know where your business went afterwards. You were saying that my sense is that your story was that you had a global business, but what you discovered is that the business model was moving towards a local market where people. So yes, you were facing problems related to the strong Australian dollar and shipping costs, but what you had also discovered thereafter was that there were actually a proliferation of companies, but what they were mainly doing was producing for their local markets. I didn't know where that ended up, so that was just a question. Okay, so I think it's not online, then I yield and welcome questions from the audience.
Could I actually address those?
Sure.
So we're looking for this slide to come up. Yeah, right there. I hope you guys can see this. So in order of your questions about what surfing culture, oh, go ahead, honey.
Is that visible? Yeah.
Is that visible to the people at home?
Yes.
Yep. Okay. One of a Chinese young lady that's staying with us right now, she lives on the other side of the bay from Shanghai, and those little islands out there, and I forget their name.
Shangsu.
Shangsu, that sounds familiar. And she says that when she was young, they would go to the beach and she loved swimming, but there were no surfers. And then she went away to Hong Kong for college for 8 years and came back, and it was full of surfers. So that's how fast surfing has grown very recently in China. Here I want to talk about the history. Did you know that Hangzhou has probably the most amazing surfing history of all cities in the world? And this is an absolute fact that our friend Nicholas Zelena, who studies the Chinese culture and Chinese language, we're going through a museum called the Bamboo Museum, far inland from here. And there was this picture that you can see here. And that is somebody riding a wave, and that was painted hundreds of years ago. And it depicted an event that happened hundreds and hundreds of years ago. And so as he began to unpack what he saw here, the riverbore here in Hangzhou, it comes in regularly. And during the autumn festival in 1270, at the height of Hangzhou, you had the emperor in the top of the 5-story pagoda watching the autumn festival. And the autumn festival is part of the moon cycle, where you have the biggest riverbore coming up the river. And he watched the highlight of the entire festival was watching the local communities have the representatives riding the boar wave as it went up the channel and moved ever so slowly, because as the tide goes out and the water comes in, it creates a wave up to 5 meters tall. And the wave slowly moves because the water's moving out so fast, and the wave climbs as it rolls through. It's a very, very treacherous wave at times when it's like that. And at the autumn festival was the highest and lowest tides of the year. And so for up until the 1800s, there were surfers riding that boar wave regularly, and it was a national pastime. So that surfing is very old, but the interpretation of what they were doing is a bit skewed because it's been interpreted by non-surfers, and there's no evidence of what they surfed at all. And so like in Hawaii, I would very, very, very much like myself, along with my fellow surfers and fellow locals of Hangzhou, to re-engineer what they were surfing to ride that wave, because it was a huge, important identity building event in surfing here. And when I look at the Chinese surfers, when they say, oh, we're copying the Western culture, I say, well, hold on. You have it all here. You just haven't looked at what your own history enough. So I'm hoping that the FEC and the locals here can unpack this history, because it's very new. It's just all come out very recently, because we're reinterpreting what they said. We go to the Wall Museum and they say there were children of the tide who would stand with a flag, and they would try to hold themselves into place and stand against the tide as it came in. Where we see that and go, you're not standing against the tide, you're gone. That wave is going to hit you, and you're not going to stand there for more than a second on a small day. Though they were surfing, when they said they're back to the tide, that meant that the tide was behind them and they were riding towards wave and going up the Hangzhou River. So perhaps the greatest surfing event in history is yet to be unpacked and learned about. And okay, I'll just leave it at that. With your questions of what happened after in myself, I started making some photo shows. I just survived, we're doing the PhD and making surfboards, just plopped along. And then I became a politician. So where the answer to your question of what did I do after the crash of my own business was, I did the PhD with Tim Smith, made surfboards for a little while, and then became a politician, because I thought my culture is to enhance the environment, to be a custodian of the environment, and there's no better way than to be a politician. So we did it.
Thank you.
Okay. Yes.
Yeah. Thank you very much for this.
Introduce yourself.
Yeah, I'm Conrad Hamilton. I'm a postdoctorate here, Department of Politics and International Relations. CNU. So came up today to see you. And thank you very much for this talk. And I found it interesting because in a way you've been so specialized in it. So you have such an interesting repository of knowledge with that subject. Of course, to me, it's quite foreign. It's also interesting how you're linking this up, with very universal concerns, right, with respect to climate change and these issues. So I'm not, maybe contra, Mahoney's, I don't know, description or suggestion. I'm not going to attempt to comprehensively theorize what you're saying. Though if I were to, it sounds to me like part of what you're describing here, maybe part of how surfing encourages the development of ecological sensibilities, because when you surf, nature isn't encountered just as a site of resistance. It is a site of resistance, of course, but it's also a site of propulsion, right? You're also being kind of accelerated, right? And you're kind of moving on the wave, so to speak, right? So I think that helps progress away from conceptualizing nature as someone like Jean-Paul Sartre would say, anti-praxis, right? Just a pure negativity.
Yeah.
And progressing towards a kind of positive ontology of nature, a positive appreciation that's starting to break down, this kind of cultural binary that was calcified in the West with the development of capitalism, society, and nature.
Yes.
We're starting to think of it more in terms of the positive features of nature in that way. But I won't go too much down that road, but that's just an interesting note, I think, to think about. But I was going to ask you, well, really, I had two questions, but I think the first one is maybe most pertinent. So while you were talking, I was also, to employ Mahoney's play on words, surfing myself. I surfed the internet a little bit on my phone. And I was looking up surfing and environmentalism, and I noticed, so there were some, and I have no doubt that what you're saying is true about environmental concern. And but I did notice there were some objections that people had voiced. And I think these largely hinged on 3 points. One, I think, was disruption of sedimentation balance in the ocean because of the creation of waves. The other one, I think, was the loss of equipment, right? Because of the frequent use of materials that aren't necessarily biodegradable, for example. And the third one has to do with just the traffic and so forth caused by surf traffic, right?
Yeah.
So exogenous activities that way.
Yeah.
So I just, again, I'm sure that what you're saying is true, but you obviously have experience in this field. So I wanted to ask you how you feel that those issues are being resolved, and what your sense is of the overall position with respect to these things. This is a little bit more very straightforward and schematic question, but out of personal curiosity, I also visited Hainan. I love Hainan, by the way, and very multicultural near there compared to most of China. Interesting. Beautiful climate.
Yeah.
And I was struck too by the sheer volume of surfers. Right? It does seem to be quite fashionable, right? But I was just going to ask you, in your experience, if you've had opportunities to travel to other, sites which are important for surfers in China, and what your sense is of what is maybe the second most popular place or third most popular place in China for that, because I'm a little bit curious about the geography. So those are my two questions.
The last one first, popular places. I would love, Margie, and I would love to visit these places, and share, our surfboard making abilities. We're pretty advanced in that area. We can go and turn that waste of those the beginner surfboards, which are good for a season, then they're not good anymore. Turn those into usable surfboards again, and actually really high-end surfboards. We know how to do that. And the population, the surfing population in China is exploding. I don't know if we're all aware of it, but my gosh, a lot of people like to surf. And just looking at the growth of Hainan is amazing. But it happens, from what I understand, all along. But I'm very, very new to it. I'm very interested. Wetsuit waste. Waste is a big problem when you say that the people want, surfers want to be environmentally conscious, yet they travel. And of course, the travel is really the biggest part of our waste. I mean, when people say, oh, that look at that surfboard is made of petrochemical, the reality is a couple of trips to the beach and back in your car is as much pollution as that surfboard creates. So it's not the end of the world. It's actually, from my perspective, of course, as a politician who has a dump or a waste facility within our shire, filling up that waste facility is a big deal. And so that's actually it. I know the importance of the value of a hole in the ground where you put your trash in. Hainan, I'm sure, has the same problem. So that is something that's at the back of surfers' minds. And another side issue is wetsuits made from neoprene is sort of a dirty secret among surfers because it's a terribly polluting product, the neoprene wetsuit. And the surfers are very collectively working that. A surf film came out called The Big Sea, which really addresses, said, surfers, look at this, look at where your wetsuits are coming from. And the whole surf industry has changed, has acknowledged this, and has gone back and looked at different types of wetsuits, different rubbery style materials, and that's a hot issue. And it really was brought to the table by one backyard surfboard filmmaker. So that shows again the coreness of the surf culture around the world. They're saying, hey, wait a minute, these wetsuits aren't right. Look what's happening to these poor people in Mississippi. And then the last is, the first question you asked was about harmony with nature and the disruption with silt, sands and silts and things. And I think that the Tao, I think we can all learn a bit from Tao, learn the Tao of surfing. Maybe that's a book. Is that helpful?
Yeah,
Thank you, Conrad. I think Tim, you have a question? Tim Smith?
Thanks. Great to see you, Tom.
You're on mute, brother.
I can't see Margie, but hi, Margie. Great that you're both over there. So Tom, excellent talk and really good to see you again. So that's really great. Look, I really enjoyed it. I think one of the things that I was curious about, I mean, I totally agree with your point about, local scale grassroots movements being important for environmental protection. And obviously we've seen the expansion of surfing reserves internationally.
Tim, we missed all that. Please start over again. And good to see you again.
Sorry, well, great to see you, Tom. I said hello to Margie too. I can't see her, but great that you're both there. You can hear me okay now?
Yeah, excellent.
So really excellent talk, Tom. I mean, I guess I really picked up, what resonated with me was your discussion about, the impact of local grassroots movements on environmental protection efforts, and we've seen the expansion of internationally of surfing reserves. But I wasn't really sure of their history or presence in China and whether is there a surfing reserve in China or is there the potential for one? So that's my question.
I would say Hainan would be really high on the list, but no, there's not. There's no biosphere reserves with surfing here, and I do not believe there's any surfing reserves here. It's just that new, Tim. And
I don't think we have any politicians who serve.
Well, that's your problem, isn't it?
It's not a KPI for promotion.
Well, that is, around the world, I have a connection of politicians that surf it. Yeah.
I went on this morning to see like how many leaders around the world surf. And one of the things that I noticed is that they're mostly local leaders. They don't tend to have aspirations for national office, from what I can see. At least I didn't see any major things that didn't happen. But a lot of local leaders are involved in the surfing community if those communities have surfing.
That's good.
That demonstrates their activity.
On this topic, I have a question.
Yes.
Hi, my name is Giulio Pompei, and I am a PhD student at UWA in Australia. We focus on sustainable environment economics and surf ecosystems. And I was wondering if you are aware of any political party in the world that is trying to give voice to these issues that are raised from the surf community. So what I see is that the surf community is really focused on trying to protect the environment, but sometimes is not heard from politics. So from your perspective, if you are aware of any political party that is trying to support the voice of surfers.
I can't speak for the rest of the world, but I can definitely speak for Australia and Surfers for Climate. What's his name? Lobbyist, yeah. And what is the name of the Joshua Kirkman? He runs the Surfers for Climate, and he is specifically lobbying the politicians. So he is a quasi-political group, and he says, activism is activism. We all know what the problem is. The solution is political. And so that's his focus. And he's been very successful. And of course, you had the great singer from Midnight Oil, Peter Garrett, who was a surfer. And he's probably our closest link to a top politician, but of course he wasn't there long. as a surfer, I think politics is exceptionally hard on surfers. Oh yeah, Peter Wish Wilson. Yep. So Peter, yeah, look up Peter Wish Wilson as well.
What's the name again? Peter?
Peter Wilson.
Wilson.
Wish Wilson. Wish with an H. Wilson.
Okay. Wish Wilson. Okay, thank you very much. Yeah, I totally agree that it's very important now that there might be some more attention on the political side about these topics. Otherwise, see that the surf community is just looking to themselves about these topics, trying to raise awareness, but then action needs to be taken on a political step. Yeah, thank you very much for your answer.
And then also, when it came to the Fight the Bite, which was a colossal political campaign, and Tim, you may be able to, give further background on this engagement with surfers, leading the charge. Of course, lots of other environmental groups were in on that, but they stopped it. What do you think, Tim?
Yeah, I think there's been lots of campaigns. I mean, the Bite campaign that Tom was talking about was really about petroleum mining off the south of the Great Australian Bight, and it was a collective effort, I think, among surfers nationally to try to have impact on that issue. But there's been lots of local scale issues like Bastion Point about expanding seawalls for marinas and things like that. That I think there's a lot of collective influence that surfers have been able to bear on these issues, and that's why I think the idea of a surfing reserve is really great, and an international network of them, because it brings an international voice to these issues rather than local voices. So that's why I was keen to explore whether there's a possibility of this to occur in China as well. I'm not sure, Tom, how many surfing reserves there are internationally. You might have a better idea of it, but I think they're obviously, some of them are linked to the biosphere reserves that Tom's heavily involved with as well. And I think, it's really about getting these grassroots collective initiatives to work together to really force action on these issues. Yeah.
Well, I think in the case of Hainan, which I think I first went to Hainan in '99, and I didn't see any surfers. But the Hainan is actually in a very interesting moment. This year in December, all of Hainan will be declared a free trade port. And we have a lot of visa-free arrivals now for Hainan. That's expected to increase. So we would anticipate more and more tourists and likely more and more people associated with surfing. I think the extent to, and if the local community there is as big as you say it is, and I haven't observed it personally, they're probably savvy. They probably understand that the value of having a surfing reserve or some type of reserve, and the importance of presenting that not only to the local officials but the provincial officials in Haikou, and they would link that very directly to both the ecological value but also the commercial tourism value. So, but if you're connected to someone in Hainan and they haven't been thinking about that, then that's the sort of advice that you should be promoting to try to influence policymakers. So policymakers are always looking for innovative ideas to sort of move things ahead. And I do know that there is a lot of coastline in Hainan, and probably and they do have a reserve culture. There are other types of reserves in Hainan, so maybe that would be something that someone could undertake as a appropriate advisor consultation approach.
Well, like there's a new field called the economics of surfing. And of course, on the Sunshine Coast, and Tim Smith was a big part of understanding that and promoting the economics of surfing. And that is, how can you calibrate or measure the value that surfing has for an area? And there's many different ways, of course, in health and in local businesses and all that. But in Noosa, there's a very rough way, and that is by real estate value. And if you have an area that's protected for being why people come there, and you don't let it change or become overdeveloped, well, your real estate values just keep going up and up and up, as those of us that live there know. So there's many reasons why, economic reasons, political reasons, and various reasons to create a surfing reserve and a coastal reserve.
And I hate to draw a direct comparison here, but I think China has learned a lot of lessons with how to manage, for example, the base camp associated with Everest. We have so many people coming in year after year where they can really struggle with impact assessments and waste problems. So I think that certainly it would be much easier to manage on the coastal region. I would also suspect that there is a big push right now to increase Hainan's stature, because Hainan is the province that, from the Chinese perspective, exercises governance over the South China Sea. So in order to further legitimize that, we see some of the developments that are taking place as a free trade port, and the extent to which you can have positive buy-in from a global surfing community. That would be something that would I think, also support the central government's vision of developing Hainan further, but doing so in an ecologically responsible way. Are there any other questions? You have one? Yeah, introduce yourself.
Oh, hi, a question.
Maybe.
Oh,
Go
hello.
ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, hi, my name is Anna Miller. I'm a senior research fellow at the University of Western Australia, and I've been working in a number of different aspects of environmental management, including surfing in the last few years. So I had a question around the governance of surfing resources. So we are seeing a lot of effort put into the definition of discrete surfing reserves, whether that's under the Save the Waves Coalition framework or Bells Beach or the National Surfing Reserves under the Crown Lands Act in New South Wales. However, these protections are very localized. We are putting a lot of effort to defining protection for very specific high quality waves, whereas the other, I'll call close to 2,000 waves that we have in Australia remain invisible to the legislation. And this is very, very different to how we manage other resources. So for example, our water resources in every state, they typically have a water act that provides the legislative framework for managing those resources, and things that can and cannot be done. And then it's up to the policies and the plans to implement the legislation and make sure those resources are managed in accordance to the legislation. It seems that surfing is completely outside of the frameworks that we have now. So I was wondering whether your views, Tom or Tim, maybe you can provide your thoughts on how we can leverage the legislation and the policy frameworks that we have now to include surf breaks as existing natural assets alongside other natural coastal resources that are already recognized.
Well, Tim, do you want to take that one first?
Look, I think that's a really good question, and I mean, I think Carmen Elric Barr, who's a Future Earth fellow, and I recently wrote a few papers looking at the institutional arrangements for coastal management in Australia, and basically what we found was that the policies and legislation for protecting the coast are both not substantial or intentional. So, while we might have some specific legislation around particular aspects of the coast, there's a whole bunch of other policy and legislative instruments that actually create a bunch of adverse impacts on that coastal area as well that we're not considering in an integrated way. So, I mean, I guess that's the first part to it, and that's why I sort of go back to the comments about grassroots initiatives and how important they are. But if there's some way to collectively get broader advocacy through them, I mean, I have very little faith in the role of government in protecting the coastline, really. I mean, governments are really about protecting private business interests and economic growth more than environmental output. So, I mean, the question that Julio raised before about political parties, protecting the coast. I mean, I'm just so skeptical of that. There's so few groups that are really have environment at the core, and as we know, it's a hierarchical relationship between environment, economy, and society. You know, without environment, you don't have society, and without society, you don't have economy. But yet we seem to prioritize economy over everything. So this is a roundabout way of trying to say that I have very little faith in those instruments anyway. But I think you're right that my view is that anything that can protect the coast is a good thing. So even though it's only protecting a handful of the breaks in Australia, it's still focusing light on the importance of the natural amenity and environmental aspects of those places that hopefully then creates a cultural shift and creates more advocacy around broader protection. So I agree that there's lots of issues with just protecting just a few of these places, but hopefully it has broader impact, particularly if we can connect them internationally. But I'm not sure if I answered or helped with that question, Anna, but
yeah, thanks, Ian. And I've been following your work and that of Carmen. I think also the surf can learn a lot from other aspects of coastal management. Sometimes at first we're a bit isolated, and we know a lot about the surf, but I think it's really beneficial that we have meetings like this where we connect with other disciplines and other stakeholders and other academics and knowledge holders and around other aspects of the ocean. Like waves don't happen in isolation. We're just part of very complex systems.
I think Tom's role as a counsellor is just so pivotal to these things, and he is able to join the environmental and economic benefits in a forum that can actually enable change. So I think it's so critical having people like Tom in those roles. So yeah, I really appreciated the talk, Tom.
Thanks, Tim. Yeah, I have just ever so slightly more belief in the legal political system than Tim, but I agree with everything else.
No, that's an interesting point, because I think the general perception is that I think certainly in the United States where I grew up, that surfing culture is kind of counterculture and not against government the way, say, social and political conservatives are, but certainly not in tune with that type of system or way of thinking. But of course, if we want to accomplish anything in China, we have to work hand in hand with government. And fortunately, we are living in a period where the government has placed environmental protection as a very high priority. But we're also still struggling to sustain an economy despite headwinds from the West. So those are some things that we have to balance, but certainly we have to engage proactively the government here. You had a question.
Just introduce myself. Okay. My name is Ji Xuan Feng. I'm a faculty member at Scala. And I didn't do surfing, but I did the stand-up paddleboard and kite surfing when I was a PhD student at the University of Miami in the US. That was like more than 10 years ago. So I think thank you, Tom and Margaret, for sharing your story to us. And I think many of the points that you made promote outside of the surf community, right? A lot of people using the coast, like recreational fishing and other activities. Certainly will be interested in this environmental protection, I think. And one thing that I do observe is that surfing is now part of the Olympic Games, right?
It is now.
I wonder would that help in promoting your advocacy and reaching to a more broader community?
Well, that would have been the best question a few years ago. But surfing is in the Olympics now, and it has done exactly what you said. It has broadened the scope of surfing dramatically around the world. Hugely. Well, yeah. We in Hainan, Mark and I were just with the junior Chinese national team that they're gearing up for the next Olympics. So they're starting the kids out very, very young. And in surfing. So it absolutely has changed in China. We know that each district in China actually has surfing teams, and they're working very hard on that. They see it as a sport. for sure. And of course, hopefully, any surfing is recognized as important, and clean water and all the other culture aspect that comes with surfing is respected